Hello everyone, this is Shannon from That's So Po, and today I am bringing you my wrap-up of Black History Month 2019 in February. I read quite a few books that were absolutely amazing. Not quite everything that I put on my TBR though. I had put very ambitiously 20 books on my TBR, knowing that I wouldn't read all of them. I managed to read 7 of those books, plus I read an additional 3 books which were sequels to a couple of those books, which I absolutely loved. One of the first books I finished was The Sorcerer of the Wildeeps by Ashante Wilson, which I loved. This book was a beautiful fantasy about a demigod, Damane, and his work to protect a caravan with another group of mercenaries against some evil magical monsters, while also falling in love with one of the other men in the caravan. It was a beautiful story, a little violent, but just such a great magic system that I absolutely adored it. And so I picked up the sequel, which was not a sequel, it's more of a book set in the same world called A Taste of Honey. So this book was set in the same world, but maybe 1,000 or 2,000 years prior, and it focuses more on a love story. So it's about a young boy, Akib, who sort of blossoms sexually when he meets a soldier from another land, and they fall in love, but this is very much against the rules and social mores of his society to have a male-male relationship. So it's all about him navigating his obligations to his family and to his society against what he wants for himself. It was very beautiful, and I absolutely loved both of these books. I would definitely pick up anything else by Ashante Wilson. Next, I finished The Fifth Season by N.K. Jemisin, and this was a fantasy novel as well, also with an amazing magic system, really well-developed world that had such an interesting social structure and system about these origins, who are people who have an ability to manipulate the earth and, cause the earth to move and things like that. The fifth season was so good that I immediately went out and I got the other 2 books in the trilogy, The Obelisk Gate and The Stone Sky, which were just so good. This series, the Broken Earth trilogy, is amazing. I think that not only is the world building and the fantasy just spectacular, but it has a lot to say about social justice issues. So when you read this, if you pick it up, enjoy the story, but also understand some of the bigger themes in it, because it's really impactful. It also talks a lot about trauma and overcoming it, and there's just so much in there to think about and to process. It's such a good deep series, and I loved it. Next, I finished The Black God's Drums by Djeli Clark, which was another beautiful fantasy. This was a steampunk alternate history novella set in New Orleans after the Civil War, and it was such a great, fun, really beautiful story about a young girl, Creeper, who is possessed by a wind goddess, and it just is such an interesting world and such a fast-paced, great little adventure that Creeper has. I really hope that Djeli Clark writes more in this world, because I would snatch it up in a second. The next book I finished was Unforgivable Love by Sophfronia Scott, which was a retelling of Dangerous Liaisons set in the 1940s in Harlem. So the setting of this was absolutely beautiful. I loved just the lusciousness of the descriptions of what it was like to be in 1940s Harlem. Those things were absolutely beautiful, but the plot and the characters, which were, I think Dangerous Liaisons was this sort of soap opera type of story, didn't really work for me. I found it very hard to connect to, and just really frustrating seeing all of these awful characters do awful things. Next, I read You Can't Touch My Hair by Phoebe Robinson, which was an audiobook, and I absolutely loved it. It was a very funny memoir talking about Phoebe Robinson's experiences growing up as a Black woman in the US, and just some of the sort of microaggressions and daily frustrations that she has felt due to issues of sort of racism and sexism, but all told in a very funny way. So I really liked this audiobook. Then I finished Between the World and Me by Ta-Nehisi Coates, which similarly explores a lot of issues of racism in the US, but not with humor. This is a very serious book, but really, really moving and very beautiful. The way that Ta-Nehisi Coates writes is almost poetic in many instances, and it really explores what it was like for him to grow up in the US as a Black boy and some of the enormous social issues and systemic inequities and the effects of those, not just in a large way, but on every single day and on his outlook, on his way of connecting with the world, and how that weight of living in a system that is sort of stacked against you can be so difficult to escape, and how a lot of people deal with it in negative ways. It's just a very moving book, and I would definitely recommend this to anyone. And lastly, I finished The Poet X by Elizabeth Acevedo, which was a beautiful book. I listened to this on audio, and I highly recommend it on audio because Elizabeth Acevedo reads it herself, and it is poetic. All of the book is told in the form of poems, in prose. It's absolutely lovely exploration of a young teenage girl who is growing up in a very restricted religious community where she is shamed and often silenced and told not to be herself. And she's got so much to say and so many feelings and emotions just bubbling up inside of her that she wants to share. So she journals about it, and this is all about her journey, and it's really, really beautiful, very moving, and I also highly recommend this book to anyone. So although I didn't finish everything that was on my TBR, I still have such a strong interest in reading all of these wonderful books that I have put on it, and I do plan to continue trying to read those throughout the year. Many of the books that I had put on my list work really well for some of the other priorities that I have. So there are many women authors, there are many authors who have written nonfiction, there are trans authors, there are authors who have written poetry. So I'm gonna try still to put many of these books that I had planned to read in February into other months because they also sound amazing and I want to read them. Spending February focusing on so many different Black and African American authors was such a great experience. These were all books that I had previously added to my TBR, but I just hadn't gotten around to them yet, and that was a real shame because these were fantastic books. So I'm so glad that this month sort of got me to prioritize some of these books. And I think that it was really wonderful to actually spend the month focusing on the experience of a particular group of people because there were so many insights that I gained across multiple books. It was like looking at the same picture but from many different perspectives. And I wanted to share just a couple of the takeaways that I have after this month. So a couple of the themes that I noticed in many of these books were a lack of control over your own body, and also a silencing or not having a voice. So for the control of one's body, almost all of the books had something about this. It was explored in a lot of different ways, but it was a big theme that really throughout the nonfiction as well as the fiction kept popping up again and again. One aspect of not controlling your body is that other people are in control of it and that they get to make those choices and you don't have any say in it. For example, in The Black God's Drums, the main character, Creeper, is basically possessed, I guess you could say, by the goddess of the wind. And often this means that the goddess is in control of Creeper's actions or will stop Creeper from doing something. In Unforgivable Love, one of the main characters is sort of traumatized by the experience of watching one of her close childhood friends who was sexually active and got pregnant be forced into marriage with somebody she didn't want and sort of have a very unhappy future because of that. So in both of these cases, there's this idea that you don't get to make the choices about your own body. Another aspect of this is that your body can be hurt. It can be harmed by others and you have no recourse, and you should not stand up for yourself or else you will be punished even more. In the 5th season, this is really, really strong. The Origines, who are the caste who can manipulate the earth, they have guardians, and these guardians are in charge of them, and they are supposed to make sure that the Origines don't harm anybody. And the guardians have to have complete obedience from their origins. And to do this, they often will physically harm the origins really quite severely, and the origins absolutely must not react. And if they react, they are killed because they are seen as not having enough control and they're too dangerous to be allowed to live. In Ta-Nehisi Coates, the Between the World and Me, similarly, young Black boys are forced to accept that police can do whatever they want to their bodies, or that they might be thrown into jail, or all sorts of different sorts of things that affect their safety, and they are not allowed to react. If they react, then they will face the consequence of even more severe repercussions. Another aspect of this is shaming people for the bodies that they have and making them feel like who they are is wrong. So in The Poet X, Xiomara is shamed for having generous curves and for being sexually attractive to others and told she's a bad person for this. In A Taste of Honey, Akib, the main character, the boy, is shamed for having sexual feelings for other men and for being gay. There's just a lot of issues revolving around control of your body and your choices with your body that is very interesting and very thought-provoking. The other theme of being silenced, of not having a voice, of not being supposed to have a voice is also really prevalent in a lot of these books. So in The Poet X, it's really, really present. A lot of the story is simply about Xiomara finding her voice and being able to say what she wants to say, because there's so many people who are suppressing what she has to say or just not listening. In the 5th season as well, the Origines are often in hiding, unable to speak about what they can do because they know that they will face repercussions. They're supposed to be this class of people who are basically controlled and outcast and not listened to. They don't have any power or any voice. Then there's the idea that you shouldn't speak up because if you did, you would harm other people with what you have to say. With Phoebe Robinson, in her book, You Can't Touch My Hair, this is explored in this idea of the angry Black lady trope, where she feels she can't speak up when injustices happen because she will be seen as an angry Black lady and sort of dismissed as simply angry and not somebody who has a valid issue that they're trying to address. In Ta-Nehisi Coates' book, Between the World and Me, he talks about how it's seen as wrong for people to talk about social injustice and the issues that are caused by this, because that causes those who live in a better socioeconomic status to feel guilty about how a lot of the benefits that they experience are built on the backs of those who have been subjugated. So there's a really interesting theme about having a voice in a lot of these works. Looking at all of the amazing books that I read this month, I wanted to be able to give a recommendation for if you could only read 3 of these, which would it be? This was super hard for me because I love so many of these books, but I wanted to go ahead and give a try. So I think my first recommendation that everybody should read is Between the World and Me by Ta-Nehisi Coates. I think that it is just such a powerful book that has so much insight. I would really recommend that everybody read it. Next, I think that I really enjoyed The Poet X. I thought that that was such a powerful book, such a beautiful story, and so immersive in the perspective of this young girl growing up in a very constrained society. So I loved this book and I would definitely recommend it. The third book that I would recommend is The Black God's Drums by Djeli Clark. This book was really interesting to me, not just because I absolutely loved it, but also because I've heard Djeli at Onyx Pages talk before about the power of fiction, about how when there are social injustices, fiction can be a way for authors to imagine a better world, a world where we move beyond some of these social inequities. And I think that this book did that absolutely wonderfully. So if you have a chance to read any of the books that I've mentioned from this month, go ahead and do it. But if you don't have enough time to read everything, I really highly recommend these 3 books. I hope everybody had an amazing reading month, and if you did anything like Black History Month or Blackathon or focused on Black authors, I would love to hear about what you guys thought and what you read. If you made a video about it, please tell me about it in the comments below. I'd love to go check it out. Or if you've read any of the books that I read this month, if you have thoughts or comments, I'd really love to hear them.